Hey, remember the Fallout TV show from a few months back? It was on Amazon Prime Video. The main story was a neat inversion of Fallout 3 story that was surprisingly faithful to the general tone of the series, weirdos on the internet who can't read timelines be damned. And everyone was tripping over themselves for Walton Goggins. Which is fair. That man has charisma falling out of his back pocket, and the ghoul was the best part of the show. I mean, come on, who could say no to that face? After that, I went, I could play a Fallout game. And saw that Fallout 4's Game of the Year edition was around $11, so I snatched it. And then Bethesda released the next-gen update that broke a bunch of mods, and I decided that for all of that stuff to just get fixed, and I haven't touched it since. And then I found out that one of the mods chiefly affected was the focus of this week's video, Fallout London, which surprisingly dropped 2 weeks ago. This is one of the mods that was affected by the update the most. It was so much of a change in comparison to Fallout 4 that Nexus Mods, one of the biggest repositories for PC gaming mods on the internet, could not host it, which is where GOG comes in. If you've been not on the internet at any time in the last 16 or so years, GOG was originally called Good Old Games and was created by CD Projekt of Witcher and Cyberpunk fame. Their mission? To release archived versions of old video games to make sure that they are always available and free of the more intrusive forms of digital rights management. They've since rebranded to be a more general storefront focusing on older releases and providing DRM-free copies of video games. The reason for this little preamble is to describe the tale of events leading up to the release of July 24th, which came out of nowhere, and I've been playing it on and off for the last few days/week. After using a downgrader tool provided by Team FOLON to make it so that I could install and convert it over, I got started. So let's talk about how Fallout London, much like the TV show I mentioned at the start, is the most interesting thing done with Fallout in the last decade. Before the proper narrated intro, we get a PSA from the British government detailing what to do and have in the event of a nuclear strike, and the entire thing felt incredibly haunting. Turns out, when you strip out most of the Vault Tech and Vault Boy branding, this shit is suitably horrific. When you get the main narration setting up the main players and how London's changed since the American and Chinese went full nuclear, and since it's roughly 160 years since the bombs dropped, you get a good sense of this new status quo. You got the gentry, which is the British monarchy and the ruling class that survived in their ivory towers, the Arthurian Knights of Camelot, who want to overthrow the gentry and establish a democracy, and are basically what happened if Caesar's legion wasn't a despotic slave-run empire. And, of course, we have the fifth column, who, while also wanting to overthrow the monarchy, are just straight-up fascists, so I'm shooting those pricks on sight. And those are the main players. You start in a tube looked over by two scientists, and when your handlers are killed by another group raiding the lab, you escape. To look back to that horrific opening real fast, a thing about Fallout London I appreciate is that its first 2 hours are reminiscent of the original Fallout, and that it's a fucking horror game. You have very few resources and are armed with nothing but a balisong knife and your wits. Most of my early hours are spent dealing with radiation, fighting off giant bugs, mangy foxes, and nearly getting eaten by a womble, which I don't get the naming reference of, but it's essentially old Blighty's equivalent of the fucking Death Claw. And then there's this chicanery on top of all that. Oh, don't look at me, it's set in the UK, so I'm legally obligated to make a Benny Hill reference. But back to the horror, there's a mission early on where you need to cross the river by going under it via tunnel. But it's heavily irradiated, and when you hear an explosion, the emergency lights come on, and you're suddenly swarmed with ghouls. I almost jumped out of my chair in fear. Once you get to the other side, things start to mellow out a bit, but holy shit, Fallout London can be terrifying. Another thing that I like is how quintessentially British Fallout London is. There are the factions that I mentioned at the beginning, one I'm doing a side quest for right now called the Vagabonds, who are Fallout's version of the Peaky Blinders. The cars are different, the foods are different, and the region's main currency is tickets to London Underground, and you can trade any tickets you get off of Nuka-Cola bottles for more tickets. Non-feral ghouls are referred to as commuters. Your main inventory / map / status looker upper thingy is a futuristic looking Walkman called an Attaboy, which is just a reverse engineered Pip-Boy. The River Thames is irradiated as fuck, and as a side effect, the titular London fog is also irradiated as fuck. Hell, the first two scientists you see at the beginning of the campaign are voiced by Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy, aka the 6th and 7th Doctors. And there's a robot in Parliament voiced by Robert Burkow, who is the former Speaker of the British House of Commons. It doesn't get any more British than that. Seeing how the Great War didn't affect just America for a change is an incredible breath of fresh air, and I've only been playing for around 10 or so hours so far. I know Bethesda isn't interested in exploring Fallout outside of America, and that's fine. It's mainly about how America as a region deals with nuclear annihilation and eventually springing up from the ashes to try and build something better, as seen in Fallout 2 and New Vegas. But fuck, would it be interesting and cool to see other areas in the world affected by the Great War. While Fallout London is an impressive achievement in modding, to the point where I'm frequently saying this game is impressive instead of this mod is impressive, it's still worth remembering that all this impressive meat is built on Fallout 4's skeleton. And saying this as someone whose first experience with Fallout 4 is through this mod, it's mechanically fine. It's certainly aged, but feel-wise, it's better than New Vegas, my beloved. While I appreciate that there is a sprint function in this game, God thank you, I don't like how it treats my action points like it's stamina. That's just rude. And while the shooting feels more like an actual shooter, it's not up to snuff for my standards. But then I remember that I play a lot of boomer shooters and general FPS games, and remember that not all games with guns can feel as good as those. But that's not to say it's terrible, it's mostly okay. So much so that I'm forgoing the use of VATS for the most part, and it's only 75% because VATS doesn't stop time anymore. Yeah, I'm kinda salty about that. But still, even with the mechanical jank, even with the weirdly long loading times and crashes, which you'd think a PC built in the last 5 years like mine was with an NVMe drive could handle, but it's still working on that creation engine, so I can't get what I want. However, I will say that the weapons are all very good. You got bolt-action service rifles, double-barrel shotguns, tire irons, flintlock pistols, musket rifles, laser variants of both of those, a goddamn Lewis gun that I want so fucking badly, and a lot of other pond-appropriate weapons, and a lot of older weapons too, like Mausers. Nothing like the heavier firepower or ray-gun gothic-style sci-fi weapons of the America-based Fallouts. But it tracks because neither the Enclave or the Brotherhood of Steel are active in this side of the world, so none of their weapons or technology would be here as well. I've only found a few of the quote-unquote junk weapons that supposedly plagued Fallout 4, so that's a nice thing to notice. And while I've never been to London myself, I do know how the place looks. Granted, in Fallout London it looks like something out of the Blitz, but it shows how different London was culturally, like I mentioned earlier. And while it may be the size of the entire Fallout 4 map and Far Harbor combined, it feels more densely packed than it does large, if that makes any sense. Plus, it feels like an actual place, because while I liked the Mojave Wasteland, it was just stretches of desert for long periods of time. But even if we're in merry old England, the Wasteland's golden rule still applies.
Thou shalt get sidetracked by bullshit every goddamn time.
The early hours of Fallout London are incredibly impressive. Granted, a lot of that comes from the fact that the novelty of a new setting in a Fallout game hasn't lost its luster, but it's so strong that I can't help but feel like it can carry it the entire way. And even though it's a mod made by a group of volunteers, they have the clarity of vision on display that makes me excited for whatever Team FOLON's new studio and original game is going to be. But so far, Fallout London is shaping up to be a bloody good mod, isn't it? Look, I made it the entire video without making a silly British accent. I earned that one!